Oya Hanım, sesinizi alabilir miyiz? Evet.
Tamam, teşekkürler. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this second session of TBD Women Entrepreneurs Online Forum. My name is Oya Söz, and I'm the TBD Team Leader and Project Director at EUROCHAMBERS. Turkey EU Business Dialogue Project has been implemented by EUROCHAMBERS in close cooperation with TOBB, the Union of Chambers in Turkey. During the implementation period, chambers from both Turkey and the European Union are engaging in partnerships, dialogues, capacity building with over 100 activities, different activities, including high-level business dialogues, SME surveys, SME workshops, study visits, chamber academies, audits, and much more. And today we are organizing Women Entrepreneurs Forum within the framework of TBD capacity building activities. And we will focus on private and public sources of funding in the EU and Turkey in this session. And this morning we had a session of women entrepreneur support programs. And it's a great pleasure to welcome you and such esteemed speakers today. And let me introduce them. And today, Federico Martins, who is a policy advisor on SMEs at EUROCHAMBERS, will be our moderator. And we have distinguished panelists from European Commission, Lucia Klestinkova, and she is the Equality Coordinator at DG Internal Market, Industry and Entrepreneurship and SMEs. From IFC, we will have two panelists. Samay Esmat, lead IFC's gender and private sector programs in the Middle East and North Africa, as well as in the East Europe and Central Asia. And Yaşam Talu, she is the Senior Investment Officer at IFC and covering financial institutions for Turkey, Azerbaijan, and Georgia. And Mr. Etkin Özer, Ozan from World Bank. She is a senior financial sector specialist in the World Bank in Turkey. And Mr. Güven Sak, he is the managing director of TEPAV, and he was the founding managing director of Economic Policy Research Foundation of Turkey, in short TEPAV, and which is the first and only economic policy think tank in Turkey. And Mr. Çotuk from EIB, and he's been working at EIB since 2009 and currently working as a principal advisor in Central and Southeastern Europe department. And finally, we will hear from Oksana Park, and she is the head of the Access to Finance and Entrepreneurship pillar within the Gender and Economic Inclusion team. And she also leads on the design and impact assessment of inclusive SME programs. Thank you for joining us today. Before getting started, I would like to provide you some technical information regarding the interpretation. For those, we will have interpretation in 3 languages, Turkish, English, and Spanish. And for those who would like to listen in English and Spanish, you should choose the English and Spanish option. But if you would like to hear in Turkish, you should choose the Korean option. And there are also live streaming on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter accounts of TBD, EUROCHAMBERS, and TOBB. And you may find the link above your screens to switch the language between English and Turkish. And if you have any questions, please type them in chat box on your Zoom account control panel, or please write your comments on other social media accounts. Please with your name, institution, and if you have specific name in your mind, please mention to whom you are directing your questions. Thank you very much and welcome again. And I would like to give the floor to Federico. And Federico, floor is yours, please.
Thank you. Can you hear me? I hope so. Thank you very much, Oya, for this introduction. My name is Federico Martins, as you said, and I am EUROCHAMBERS advisor in charge of SME and economic policies, and I will be the moderator for today. A few words on the format of this session. We have 1.5 hours ahead of us, with presentations to be given by 7 speakers, followed by a Q&A segment where you can react to the panelists' interventions. And I will finish with a short conclusion. My colleague Oya has already briefly introduced the speakers, but do not hesitate to visit the website of the event for the speakers' full bios. Some words about the purpose of this afternoon session. We are here to discuss about what are the private and public funding sources available to women entrepreneurs in the European Union and in Turkey, and how they can be channeled towards making gender equality a solution instead of a challenge. We will also delve into what is the role of international organizations and other financial and non-financial actors in assisting them in this process. And of course, we will also look into the different ways policy measures and strategies have been put in place to reduce the obstacles and address the difficulties related to women's entrepreneurship. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you to our first speaker, Lucy Klestynkova. I'm sorry for the spelling. Lucia is here to speak a little bit about the priorities of the European Commission on how entrepreneurship actions fit into its gender equality strategy. She will only be able to stay with us for around 20 minutes. So to the participants, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to put them in the chat box. I pass the floor to you, Lucia. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for the invitation. Hello? Is it all right now? Hello, colleague.
Lucia, it is fine now. Please proceed further.
Connected from the session. I apologize if it's on my side. I wanted to give you one more big thanks for the invitation as a big stand for women entrepreneurship and women empowerment in general, and also a big fan of Turkey. I actually started my career in the Turkish diplomatic service, so I feel it's pretty magical that it's coming together, my big passions at this stage of the year that we're in, which has been a big year for all of us, and especially for women entrepreneurs. As you've said, Federico, it's a big priority for the European Commission, obviously, for many years, to support growth of entrepreneurs in Europe, in cross-border contact, also with the businesses who are outside of the European Union. And this year is especially complicated because we see, and the data have been showing, that the social and economic consequences of the pandemic have been so much brutal on the women owners because of obvious repercussions that the lockdown have on how we are capable of managing our businesses and families, and the risk that comes with the business management, and also the parenting and mothering obligations of the women entrepreneurs. We know that while only 1/3 of entrepreneurs are women owners, which is already saddening enough, only 7% of the venture capital raised for businesses in Europe goes to female-owned businesses or mixed founder teams. So we see there's a massive gender bias in access of businesses to funding, which is one of obviously the biggest barriers to growth of businesses. That's why it has become such an important part of the conversation also that the European Commission has this year as we are negotiating the budget for the next 7-year budgeting period. This spring in March, a new strategy was adopted for small and medium enterprises, the SME strategy, and also the strategy for gender equality. And so both of these priorities are now coming together in the actions of this commission. And in the coming budget, hopefully to be approved very soon, there's going to be several measures proposed to support what we call an integrative approach to gender smart financing. And so this should cover opportunities for women to have easier access to funding under the Invest EU program, which will create concrete incentives for those venture funds and investors who will have specific gender strategies. Then there will be specific actions focused on nurturing of women entrepreneurship. So this is more softer policy tools which focus on awareness raising, dialogues, engagement to stimulate change in dialogue with stakeholders like associations like yours and other business associations who are really on the pulse of what's happening on the ground, who are in contact with the entrepreneurs, who can pass on the opportunities that there are at the European level really to go further down on the ground. There's a lot of work that we've been investing into the networking capabilities of women entrepreneurs, for instance, through the network of the Enterprise Europe Network, which is really linking the entrepreneurship circles across the European Union and their neighborhood, where we have also dedicated women entrepreneurship kind of groups. And there's also an interesting project, WeGate, WeGate for women entrepreneurs, which aims to connect female entrepreneurs. And this is now being revamped, and a new version will be launched beginning of December. So this is just a couple of breadcrumbs that I thought that I'm gonna throw out there. If anybody has any questions on this, I'll be happy to answer, and maybe it gives you a little bit of a context to the very interesting conversation that you will be having with the other speakers later on.
Thank you very much for your short presentation. I don't see any questions from the chat box. You know that the Enterprise Europe Network, I think chambers of commerce and industry are around 50 to 60% of its members. So it's good to know that there's also some gender balance mainstreaming happening there. I have a question regarding maybe about your personal, I mean, how did your personal journey affect your professional life? I mean, have you faced challenges like those that the European Commission has identified and is trying to tackle? And how do you think that professional women, especially those willing to launch a business can overcome these challenges?
Wow, that's a very interesting question. Thank you. Yes, I have faced a lot of those challenges, obviously, I guess like any woman on this planet, and you can, now I'm looking more into the space of gender equality issues rather than the entrepreneurship challenges, where in our gender equality strategy, we really shine the light on the, I mean, I don't even know how to label this, all the issues related to the violence, to the stereotyping, to the biases, to the discrimination in access to opportunities, to yeah, all kinds of complications that a woman learns to live with as we are growing up, and it is simply part of our realities. The question, or rather the tool that I found most empowering on my own journey, is simply doing my inner work and not expecting that the regulators or the politicians or the policies will deal with this, because while we are investing a lot of effort into solving this at the European level, obviously the differences are so big when it comes to these policy areas where it's borderline human rights talk, because the cultural stereotyping and the cultural context is so important. And so even within Europe, not even speaking with the kind of broader context when it comes to Turkey, even within Europe, the differences are big. And so I've learned to kind of seek out the tools and the mentors and coaches and really embark on the journey, which taught me to feel much more empowered in those situations where I felt like I'm being discriminated against, or where I would feel that I'm facing all kinds of what could be seen as attacks or disadvantageous conditions on my journey. So that's why also thanks to the inner work that I've been doing myself, and thanks to the experience that I've been through, I've also been trying entrepreneurial projects myself. I've been doing podcasting, publishing, running in politics, and now I became a coach of emerging female leaders, especially because I feel that the inner work is so important, and the most important part is having support structure who can serve as access to the education for women, who can serve as a point of support and challenge, and almost as a safe space to be in, because as especially the female entrepreneurs who feel like they are pioneers in their area, who try to bring something new and especially lead from the space of a new way of doing business and bring those feminine values or feminine leadership into the space, they are oftentimes pulled back by their old world, by the old way of doing business, and they may feel very insecure and lonely in their space. And that's where the networks and the coaching and mentoring support, I feel, is so important, because while you may feel insecure and vulnerable when you're leading from that new space in your little bubble, it's important that you are given those vitamins from the world around you so that you are stronger on your journey.
Thank you very much for these words, Lucia. Very, very insightful. Please, I know that you have to leave a bit earlier, but please stay with us until whenever you can. We will move ahead with the following speakers. I would like to introduce you to Samara Esmat and to Yesham Talu. I think they have a PowerPoint presentation. They have been working for many years in catalyzing women's entrepreneurship in the public and private sectors. So I pass you the floor now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Federico, and also Oya, for the kind introduction. Obviously, I'm speaking together with the Yesham, who will take over in just a bit. Let me start off by sharing my screen to show you our presentation. And first off, I just looked at the number of participants, and in case you haven't noticed, we have over 130 people joining us for this session. And for me, this is kudos to how important this topic is generally, and also how the Turkish business community is engaged. I'm not Turkish. I've been here for quite a while, engaged in this space, and I'm really, really amazed and in awe of how dynamic the private sector is dynamically rallying around this important agenda. So what we want to do, Yesham and I, is we want to introduce you to a little bit to our IFC Women's Entrepreneurship story in Turkey. So for those who are not familiar with us, the IFC, the International Finance Corporation, is the part of the World Bank Group that works with the private sector to address the most pressing development challenges, like gender equality, like climate change and others. Our cousins from the World Bank are on the panel today, and also our dear friends from the EBRD who have a very similar mandate, and we collaborate oftentimes in this space, are also on the panel. So the way we want to structure this, presentation, Yasham and I, is I would like to take you a little bit on a journey in a time capsule to March of 2020 when the pandemic hit Turkey. And if we have female Turkish entrepreneurs connected to this panel and listening to us today, I will ask you to think a little bit and reflect on how you as a female entrepreneur operating in Turkey have been affected by the crisis. And I'll share with you some data points and some numbers. But really my main message to you today is it's not that the crisis is hitting women harder per se, it is hitting men and women, full stop. It is hitting male and female entrepreneurs. But what's very specific about female entrepreneurs is that on the eve of when the pandemic hit, the playing field for female and male entrepreneurs in Turkey and elsewhere in the world was not equal. And I want to talk to you about that. So I'll take you a little bit into a short journey on what are the gaps between female and male entrepreneurs in Turkey. And then we'll quickly get into the program of the IFC. How are we addressing these gaps through our programming? And one of the cornerstones of our programming is around increasing access to financing and capital for female entrepreneurs. And at that point, I will turn it over to my colleague Yasham. So let me start off with taking you, as I mentioned, into a time capsule to March of 2020. Now, what happened when the COVID pandemic arrived in Turkey? What did it do to women versus men? And how is that affecting the business space? So we know quite a bit from research conducted by UN Women, who have been able to tell us that in alignment with our hunch and gut feeling, women have been hit harder in the private space, in the domestic space than men. And obviously that has implications and translates into the business arena. But really what we saw as a result of school closures and the business and the workplace having been transferred to the home, to the domestic space, we saw women spending a lot more time in Turkey on domestic care work, on unpaid home responsibilities compared to men. The time spent on these tasks went up for both men and women, but it went up for women much higher. Now try to remember this. Any time that is taken away from a woman because she's spending that time on domestic work or care work or homeschooling, that is time that's been taken away from her to focus on her business. And that is the implication of that. We also saw, as a result from this UN Women survey that was conducted, that there were also some variations in the implications of how the COVID-19 crisis had an impact on economic activity for men and women. So interestingly, we saw two things happening. We saw a reduction in working hours, and there actually the reduction in working hours was higher for men than it was for women, but we also saw job losses. And there we saw more job losses among women compared to men. So 19% of women lost their jobs compared to 14% of men. And we can go into the whys around why that happened. My personal hypothesis is that women are more concentrated in sectors that were affected by closures and shutdowns, like the service industry, like the retail sector. Now, we also know very specifically, in very specific terms, what the COVID-19 crisis did for female entrepreneurs in specific. So the previous slide talked about what it did for the domestic space and how that had implications for women's ability to work. Now I want to take you to the female entrepreneurship space, the business space. And if you are a female entrepreneur connected to this panel and you are managing a business, go back in time, go back to March and April and think about your business. That was around the time when our partners and friends, We Connect International, which is an international organization that connects female entrepreneurs with corporate buyers so that they can bring women into supply chains of corporate companies. This organization, We Connect, has conducted a global survey in April of 2020 and sampled 500 companies from around the globe. And that included a subset of Turkish female entrepreneurs. And it asked them, how has COVID impacted your business? And we're not following hunches here. We really have very specific and concrete data points. So 91% of Turkish female entrepreneurs that were interviewed as part of that survey said that they have been negatively impacted. Now, if you're a female entrepreneur, think about your own business. You may have experienced one of the things listed on the slide. Inability to move your inventory sitting idly due to collapsed demand from your customers and your buyers. You might experience increased anxiety about the situation that you're finding yourself in. And mental health is a huge issue that we're seeing across the entire business community, affecting women specifically. You might have lost consumers. You might have seen increased demand on your personal time carrying over into the business, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of things in which you have been affected as a female entrepreneur in Turkey, and that has translated also into your bottom line and into your books. Now, what's really interesting about this is, of course, male entrepreneurs have also been affected by these issues in very similar ways. But what's the difference? And this is where I want to take you now. Where I want to take you now is the gaps that existed before the crisis. And so there was an unequal playing field in the economic space in which female entrepreneurs and male entrepreneurs were operating before the crisis hit. That space was unequal. And so women were experiencing a lot more difficulty in accessing the key resources to starting and growing their business compared to men. And that created gaps between female and male entrepreneurs. Naturally, when the COVID-19 crisis hit, women were shook more dramatically than men. And that's really what happened. So let's look at the situation in Turkey. If you look at World Bank data and statistics, you will find that only 10% of formal companies in Turkey are co-owned, not even majority owned, but co-owned by women. That leaves 90% of businesses being co-owned by men. And you find a gap between men and female ownership in businesses across the world. But a 10 to 90% gap is quite staggering. And so that's definitely something that the Turkish private sector is paying attention to, especially the banking sector. Now, you'll ask yourself, why does that gap exist? It's a huge, complex issue that would require 5 more webinar sessions to get into that. But one of the key ingredients of being able to start a business and expand it and grow it is obviously and clearly having access to financing. Now, having access to capital is something that is a huge constraint on female entrepreneurs in Turkey. I'm not even going to get into the conversation about women being able to access commercial loans from their local commercial banks. The pre-step to accessing loans is actually to have a bank account. So that's a very powerful metric that we look at. If you look at bank ownership of women in Turkey, you'll see that only half of adult women have bank accounts compared to 83% of adult men. Now that's a huge gap. If you compare bank account ownership of adult women in Turkey with European averages or OECD average, you'll see that only half of adult women have bank accounts compared to over 90% of European and OECD adult women. So that's a huge gap between men and women, but also between Turkey and the European OECD context. Now, how does that then translate into your ability to borrow money in order to start and grow a business as a woman? That translates into a huge credit gap right now that exists in the Turkish market that is not met by local commercial Turkish banks. And the size of that credit gap for female entrepreneurs is around $5 billion. That's a calculation that IFC has made a couple of years ago. So what I'm telling you is that on the eve of when the pandemic hit, that was the picture. That's a snapshot of the picture. Now imagine all the stresses and the distresses and the pressures raining down on female entrepreneurs and male entrepreneurs at the same time. Clearly, it had a disproportionate negative impact on women. So how are we as IFC dealing with this? Before the COVID crisis hit, we already knew that we understood the gaps. We looked at our expertise and the value that we could bring, and we realized we could bring value in 2 distinct spaces when it comes to female entrepreneurs in Turkey. One, being an investor and financier in Turkey, clearly one space was providing capital to female entrepreneurs. Now, we don't give it to female entrepreneurs directly, but we channel it through our program, which is called the Banking on Women program, to local commercial banks in Turkey, and they on-lend it to female entrepreneurs. And so we've worked over the last decade with 4 banks, and we've provided over $150 million in financing. We also recognize that there's another area where we can add value as the IFC, because the other piece of the puzzle is not access to finance only, but also access to opportunities. To start a business and grow it, you need financing, but you also need to have a market that you can sell into. So we have recognized that we have a role to play as a corporate buyer. We have procurement operations as the World Bank Group and the IFC. And so we have made a commitment and said, not only will we, through our programming, put money in the market to provide access to financing for female entrepreneurs, but we will also make a commitment that as a procurement, as an organization that procures as a buyer, we will provide contracting opportunities to female entrepreneurs whenever we see an opportunity arises. And we've done that with 5 contractors in the last year. So I'll stop here and I'll turn it over to you, Yasham, to walk our audience through our Banking on Women program at the IFC, which really looks at how we can put capital into the Turkish market for on-lending to female entrepreneurs. Over to you, Yasham. And please let me know when you need me to switch the slide.
Thank you, Samar. So Samar provided a really good overview, and I'm working in the investment department of IFC. So I'm overlooking what we have done with the banks to channel the funds to women-owned enterprises. So IFC always had a gender focus, but the Banking on Women program, which is focusing on supporting the women-owned SMEs, started in 2010. So when the program started globally in 2010, as one of the largest operating countries, we started talking to the banks in Turkey. So just before I move on to our discussion, maybe I can tell you what the IFC definition of Banking on Women SME is. So within the SME definition, we define a woman-owned enterprise if it is either 50% or more owned by a woman, or if it is 20% owned by a woman, but there's one C-level executive, or if there's a board, 30% of that board is composed of women. So that is the definition that we use across the board for women-owned SMEs. And when we talk to the banks in 2010, we have seen that there was like just little done on the women-owned SMEs side. As you can imagine, although 90% or even more of the business is channeled through SMEs in Turkey, there are access to finance problems. And most of the SMEs get financing with collateral, and which is the weakest point for women-owned enterprises globally. So we started talking to the banks, and we have concluded two financing facilities with FIBA Banca and Alternative Bank in 2011 and 2012. Then we started working in the region. In the meantime, we continued our discussions with the banks, and we did a case study with Garanti Bank to see how the market is functioning and what is missing in the market so that they can better service the women-owned SMEs. We also looked into their SME portfolio to see how the women-owned SMEs are acting differently than the others. By the way, this is a quite important problem. When we talk to the banks, the first thing they ask, okay, you want us to channel the funding to the women-owned SMEs, but is there like something better about the women-owned SMEs? So that's why in 2018, globally, we did a study and we looked at 157 IFC client financial institutions, where we found out from our study, of course, it may not hold for all the institutions, that in terms of NPLs, women-owned SMEs are better clients compared to the others. So the women-owned SMEs had an NPL ratio of around 3% compared to 4.9% for the total SME loan portfolio. So we have been trying to gather that kind of data to support the business case for Banking on Women. And also in 2018, we invested in the $75 million Garanti gender bond in Turkey. So that bond, Samar, maybe we can go to the slide. Thank you for helping me. That is the first private sector financial institution. Garanti is the first private financial sector institution that issued a gender bond in emerging markets. So that issue was a listed issue in the Irish Stock Exchange. It had a tenure of 6 years, and it was the entire issue was to be used to support the women-owned SMEs. So IFC also has partnerships with different institutions, like the Women Entrepreneurs Opportunity Facility that we have with Goldman Sachs. And then we have the Women Entrepreneurs Finance Initiative, together with some governments and multilateral development banks. So what do we use these funding for? We work with Goldman Sachs and the US Treasury and some others to make sure that we have some money for blended finance. So when we talk to the banks, as you can imagine, the first thing they're asking is if there's any concessional funding. So what we do is that we agree on stretch targets with these banks to comply with. So if they reach the stretch targets, then we provide rebates within the IFC programs, either through VOF or through VFI. So these have been really important for us to increase the number of financial institutions that we work with. And through these partnerships and through IFC's own balance sheet, we reached a portfolio of $2.6 billion globally. So entirely, this $2.6 billion is going to women-owned SMEs. In Turkey, our portfolio is around $155 million. So this is basically it in Turkey in terms of investments, but if you have any questions, please let me know.
Thank you very much for this comprehensive presentation, the business statistics and IFC's support programs. We are running slightly behind the schedule, so I move right to our next speaker, Etkin Özan. I know that you have prepared a presentation, so I pass the floor to you.
Sorry, can you hear me, or can you see the presentation?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much, Federico and the TEBD colleagues, for inviting me to be one of the panelists in this very essential topic in the development agenda of Turkey. So considering that I have only 8 minutes, let me start quickly. So earlier today and in this session as well, my colleagues focused on current government, IFIs and private sector programs and financial sector projects as well. So I'll try to focus on what is the market failure in here and how can we increase the financial leverage for women entrepreneurs systematically. So as 50% of the total population are women in everywhere, entrepreneurship is not only boosting women's economic participation, but also providing a massive gain to the global economy. So in Turkey, the impact will be very significant. According to research shows that if there's no gender gap, per capita income will be higher as much as over 20%. However, most of the businesses owned by women are micro enterprises or SMEs, and those businesses have very limited access to finance. So globally, 80% of these businesses are either unserved or underserved by the financial sector. And like IFC colleagues mentioned, in the COVID environment, banks may became more risk averse and very selective in loan supply towards underserved segments of the society. So when we look at the women-run businesses, especially SMEs, they tend to have smaller asset base and are more likely to operate in the informal economy. And the factors that can make it harder for women to meet the requirements for obtaining a loan by providing a collateral. So let me repeat some of the statistics by IFC colleagues. So in Turkey, for example, 58% of the loans of businesses owned by women faces collateral requirements, while this number is 37% for the men-led enterprises. So the collateralization is a big issue for access to finance for women entrepreneurs. So gender inequality is especially persistent in account ownership. That is also one of the first steps for having a credit history in the banking system. So in some European and Central Asia countries, the gender gap is much larger than the developing country. Average is about 9 percentage points. Unfortunately, the largest gaps is in Turkey, where only 54% of the women have bank accounts compared to 83% of men. The gender gap is about 3 times as large as the average gap in developing economies. So what will be the reasons? So the micro data shows that the main reasons causing that women are likely to remain unbanked and have lack of access to finance are financial literacy and the low labor force participation. If you look at the data, we can see that the 72% of the unbanked women and almost 51% of unbanked men indicate that one reason they do not have any account is that one of their family members already has one. So in the developing world overall, just around the 25% of the unbanked cite this is as a reason, with no difference between men and women. So this 89% of the unbanked women are out of the labor force in Turkey, and only 5% of unbanked women are wage employed, and 6% are self-employed. So roughly in 1/6 unbanked woman in Turkey saves using semi-formal methods. And if you count those savings, actually, up to 2 million unbanked women could join the formal financial system, which will create a financial history for them and the data in the banking system. So also the 30% of the women who have an account still pay utility bills in cash, and most of them have mobile phones. And getting these women financially included into the system, so their accounts more often would help expand access to financial services for them. So another reason would be the gender bias in providing access to finance for women. A World Bank financing operation with the TSKB in Turkey, the Inclusive Access to Finance project, provided an ideal testing ground to explore this gender bias. We conducted an experiment on gender bias among loan officers in Turkish banks, and our results cite that financial institutions may unwillingly discriminate against women enterprises. And also, we find that 35% of the loan officers are biased against women applicants, where gender bias is measured as any positive difference between the amount of money allocated to the men versus the women loan applicants in the experiment, which is approximately $14,000 less. So, but the good news is, the more experienced the loan officer is, the less likely they are to resort to gender bias in decision making. And this is also supported by a similar study done by the EBRD. So what will be the solutions for this market failure? So how can we increase the promoting sound, stable, sustainable, and inclusive financial system for women entrepreneurs? So first of all, the financial education and the trainings for both financial institutions and the women are essential, as repeated by several people earlier today and in this session as well. So the second one will be the fintech solutions, which can be a very perfect tool, especially for women SMEs. But however, digital technology is not sufficient enough. So the Turkey has a well-developed payment system. It has a good physical financial infrastructure and appropriate regulations and safeguards in place. But unfortunately, the financial services need to be tailored to the needs of women entrepreneurs and the first-time users of financial services, and who may lack literacy and the numeracy skills. So developing non-bank financial sector solutions could be a tool as well in Turkey. So Turkey has a very commercial and conventional banking system-centric financial system, and it has been lacking long-term finance options. So if you can provide non-bank financial solutions like the IFC colleagues mentioned to the system, so it will help also the women entrepreneurs, like the participation banking system, capital market solutions, fund structures, or maybe the collateralization solutions, as well as the credit guarantee fund. So the public credit guarantee funds around the world have become a popular tool used by the governments to channel credit towards SMEs. So in Turkey, it can be also much more targeted, and it can also support, especially for the women entrepreneurs as well. I think there are some projects in the private sector, like the Finance Bank and others as well. They are working with the credit guarantee fund, but definitely it could be expand more. So another problem in the system is the merging the credit customer databases. If you look at the banking system, it has a great credit database provided by the credit bureau, but it has no gender tagging in the databases. Every bank has its own databases, but we can see that TOBB has entrepreneur databases for women. So the Turkish Export Assembly has databases as well. So banking system has different databases, but when you are looking for the women entrepreneurs, it's very hard to find them if they are not applying for a loan or is there a demand from them. So the merging the credit customer database will provide and enhance the leverage for the entrepreneurs. So another solution will be the state and development banks with more targeted finance and new instruments for market making. So they can serve for the private sector to operate more in a safer ground. So they can chip in the market first. So then the private sector can provide extra loans and the financial solutions for the entrepreneurs as well. So development banks like TSKB is advancing in this area as well. So we can definitely supporting those activities as a World Bank. But if you look at the IFI's contribution via financing and advisory services, those are also an important source for entrepreneurs, as many panelists today mentioned. So if you look at the current IBRD projects, the first one is the Inclusive Access to Finance projects with the TSKB, which has the $400 million loan package. It has a woman component as well in it. And also we have a recent project with the Exim Bank. Actually it's a guarantee project. It's a long-term finance for exporters project. It has also a women entrepreneurs component as well. So we are providing data for data and the finance for the system, but also we are providing technical assistance to the state organizations as well in the financing environment. Lastly, actually the most important thing above all, a holistic approach and the national policy champion are needed in Turkey. So financial literacy initiative presented in the financial inclusion strategy in 2014 should be continued also. And also there are several references in the presidency's economic program on inclusiveness. So the women entrepreneurs should find a way in those strategies as well. So if there's a national policy champion and there's a holistic approach from the government side, it will definitely help to increase the financial leverage for the entrepreneurs. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this interesting presentation and interesting data on how gender bias plays a role when accessing financing in Turkey and how the World Bank is addressing this market failure. The next speaker we have is Tekin Çotuk, who is the principal advisor in the Central and Southeastern European Department at the European Investment Bank, an organization that EUROCHAMBERS works quite close with. Tekin has also prepared a presentation, so please go ahead. I would just like to remind the participants to just press on the chat box your questions or comments, and we will try to get back to them at a later stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Federico. Good afternoon all from Luxembourg. My name is Tekin Çotuk. I'm working as the principal advisor at the Central and Southeastern Europe Department of the European Investment Bank. I hope you can hear me. Very good. And yes, see the presentation as well?
We can. Maybe it's easier if you press on your left corner top, the display, the view slides on top. It will be easier, I think. Exactly.
Can you see now?
We can.
Okay, thank you. Yes, thanks a lot. I mean, of course, my presentation will be a bit high level because I'm not a gender specialist. I'm working on the public sector operations of the bank in Turkey. So I will start maybe giving a bit of a background information about the EIB first, and then try to explain the strategy, the gender strategy that we have in place. So let me start by saying a few words now first on the EIB. So the EIB is the world's largest multilateral lender. It has provided 63 billion euro of financing last year. And this financing was provided mainly in Europe, 90% of it, and only 10% of this whole overall financing was provided outside of the EU. It is governed by the EU member states, and we raise our funds on the international capital markets, and then we pass on favorable borrowing conditions to our clients. The bank was founded in 1959, And in the 60 years of its operations, it invested over 1.2 trillion euros in more than 12,000 projects in 160 countries. Its headquarters is in Luxembourg. It has around 3,400 staff. In addition to finance professionals, we have engineers, economists, and socio-environmental experts. As to our, let's say, operations or financing in Turkey, the EIB has been supporting Turkey since mid-1960s, and it has provided more than 30 billion euros of financing. And the EIB's focus in the country has been on the key transport projects, urban infrastructure, access to finance to SMEs through its local partners, to being the private and public sector banks. EIB loans also supported other crucial sectors of the Turkish economy, such as research and development, industry and climate action, which are essential for the country's modernization and economic growth. So I can switch now to the gender equality, the strategy of the EIB for gender equality. EIB adopted its first gender strategy at the end of 2016, and its first gender action plan in 2018, aimed at implementing this strategy. So the strategy and the action plan carry a worldwide scope of application and focuses on 3 thematic pillars. The first pillar is about protecting and upholding women's rights and ensuring no harm is done to them as a result of EIB investments. The second one is enhancing our positive impact on gender equality through our investment choices and by looking at certain project design features. And the third one is investing directly in operations that target women's economic empowerment. In addition, we have also an institutional pillar, which makes sure that we have capacity and systems in place to implement this strategy. Starting off with the protect pillar, this work stream is compliance-led and concerns our social due diligence process. What I mean by that is that it aims to strengthen the focus of our environmental and social standards on the assessment, mitigation, and prevention of gender-specific risks and gender equalities at the level of our investments, whether it is related to resettlements, labor rights, stakeholder engagement, or health and safety issues. We are also in the process of developing a protocol, guidance material, and tools for better preventing harassment and exploitations, and also abuse in our operations, and provide a framework for how to handle and report such incidents, which is likely to be ready by the end of this year. This is an important step. We have already signed the joint IFI statement on preventing gender-based harassment and also exploitations in our operations. So let me move to the second pillar of our gender strategy, which is impact. The impact work stream is where we look at how we can enhance our positive impact on gender equality through our investment choices and by looking at certain project design features and project development approaches. It is particularly relevant for our infrastructure portfolio. To enhance the impact of our operations on gender equality, we first need to have a good understanding of what are the existing gender norms or gender gaps that may impact women and men's access to the services and products generated through our investments, and then look at how an investment can potentially contribute to closing such gaps by introducing specific project development or design features. It can be about identifying key sectors or project types that will have a transformative impact on women's lives and contributing to closing a gender gap. This could, for example, be investment in cervical vaccine cancer or in childcare or elderly care facilities. Now, I want to give you a bit of project examples on this impact pillar, because it will, of course, help you, to, let's say, crystallize a bit further what I have been telling to you. So in terms of the project example, let me start with Bengaluru and Pune metro in India. To make the metro in Bengaluru a more inclusive and diverse workplace and more attractive to women, 33% of the job opportunities were reserved for women who have taken up positions as drivers, as station controllers, often held by men. Creche facilities are further provided for employee children. And also women drivers have a separate recreational facility. They are scheduled to work at the stations close to where they live. And if not able to perform night shifts, they are being rostered in the morning and evening shifts. In most metro projects in India, including the ones financed by the EIB, it is standard to include certain security measures for women travelers, such as dedicated coaches for women, nighttime patrols of platforms by security personnel, including female security guards, and CCTV coverage. Going beyond this, to improve the security but also accessibility, an important feature of the Pune metro will be the provision of solar-powered electric vehicles to transport passengers between stops and final destinations. This will make the last mile of journey not only more secure, but also more accessible for different people. Another example would be Kenya Telecom. This concerns tailored data packs for women that it also serves as a telemedicine platform, providing women with antenatal and postnatal care in underserved regions in the country. Social housing in Europe, it's another project example that we have contemplated, where the design of the flats of this social housing considers the caring responsibilities of parents. What do I mean by that? Works areas are overlooking playgrounds, making it easier to work while keeping an eye on the children. Also, priority in the allocation of these flats are given to victims of domestic violence and single parents. So let me now move on to the third pillar of our gender strategy, which is invest. So invest pillar is where we look at targeted investments in women's economic empowerment by way of financial inclusion, tapping into the underserved market segments of women-led businesses, the promotion of female entrepreneurship, and access to credit. We do this because it makes business sense and because we are committed to gender equality. Women-owned businesses represent almost a third of businesses, as was said before, worldwide, but only 68 of these have unmet credit needs. So after all, there is an ample evidence that women are prudent borrowers and often have better repayment rates than men. The enterprises with women at least have half of leadership positions, with at least half of the leadership positions, have higher sales growth, earnings per share, and return on assets. And during times of crisis, their company share price performs better. So now I want to also mention about this 2X, let's say, challenge, which the IIB have endorsed in October 2019. This is a commitment from the development finance institutions of the G7 to mobilize $3 billion by 2020 in investment, contributing to women's economic empowerment in developing economies. We use this 2X challenge criteria, which have been jointly adopted by a group of 15 development financial institutions, and which you can follow from this slide, to define what we count as financing for gender equality outside the EU, and especially for our financing in support of women-owned and led businesses. 2X invests in women in 5 key ways to meet a range of objectives. This criteria focuses on women's entrepreneurship, leadership, quality employment, as well as consumption, which means access to products and services that can close a gender gap. We use similar criteria for our operations inside the EU. Again, a few examples for women's economic empowerment we do across the globe. I can give you an example, for example, from Greece that we have recently completed. This is a loan of 500 million, of which 100 million was dedicated for financing for women-led or owned businesses, supporting more than 7,000 jobs. To reach even smaller enterprises, we work through microfinance institutions, such as the Microfund for Women in Jordan. We have supported more than 100,000 women to grow their businesses. And another example will be the Eco Enterprise 3 Fund in Latin America, which is a pioneering impact fund with largely women-owned management team. So this was EIB was a lead investor in the fund, providing instrumental support and helping it grow to its current base of 22 investors and more than $35 million in committed capital. And we also make use of the EU funds, the Commission funds, for technical assistance and blending finance. For example, in collaboration with the EC, a full-fledged gender analysis will inform the design of the Kulima Agri-Finance TA facility in Malawi in Zambia. And we have also just kicked off a TA facility that will cover Cameroon, Ivory Coast, and Senegal and Uganda. And it will also provide a technical support. So, I mean, just to conclude, first of all, investing in women is not only the right thing to do, but it's also the smart thing to do. And yes, while there are some data gaps, we do have sufficient quantitative and qualitative evidence that it makes business, economic, and social sense to invest in women with a gender lens more broadly. There are no excuses for not taking action. And while significant progress is being made and more investors are applying gender lens to their portfolios, not nearly enough is being done. So there is a lot of room for improvement across the board. I would like to thank you for your attention and leave the floor to Federico again. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tekin, for allowing us to understand what initiatives and projects the EIB is funding to closing the gender gap. We move forward to the next speaker, Mrs. Oksana Pak from the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. I pass you the floor now. Oksana, thank you.
Thank you very much, Federica. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak. My ex-colleagues, as you know, I spent 4 years on the ground in Turkey, so it's lovely to reconnect with you both. I'll try to share my screen now and tell you about the EBRD's Women in Business program that started in Turkey in 2014. Can you hear me all right? Can you hear me all right? Okay.
Yes,
yeah,
yes.
I'll just share my screen now. So I think as all of the speakers before me, prior to me, mentioned, we think that gender equality is a principal agent towards building sustainable, inclusive market economies. And that's one of the EBRD's, one of the 6 EBRD's qualities in what we call transition qualities in helping building and moving to the market-based economies. So EBRD currently is going through the implementation of the gender strategy. This year is the last year. Next year we'll be launching our new strategy. And what you see here is a new iconograms of the Gender and Economic Inclusion team that I represent at the EBRD headquarters as part of the Economics, Policies and Governance Department. So I have been asked to talk about our sort of financing proposition for women entrepreneurs in Turkey. The slide here summarizes our achievements under the what we call a flagship Women in Business program, which started in Turkey in 2014 with a significant contribution and the push from the European Commission, which is one of our largest donors of the EBRD. So the slide summarizes the achievements of the first EBRD has on lend 300 million euros to 5 participating banks that was then online to 17,000 women-led SMEs. So I've seen that the previous speakers from the World Bank owned SMEs. At the EBRD, we actually follow the operational management of the company. So if the company managed by women, we call it women-led. Ownership helps, but the primary use risk mitigation, and that was to address the lending biases towards women-led SMEs and to kickstart the lending and establishing new products, as the case was in a couple of the banks which we worked with. And there's also a technical assistance, as we call them, and a few sort of things that we're proud of is that 65% of the program of the financing was channeled to the cities outside of the 3 main cities in Turkey, and that's where we know the access to finance is the most acute one. The average loan size was quite small. It was around 15,000 euros, and again, this is contributing to the that's where women sort of led SMEs tend to operate in the lower part of the business due to the sectors where female entrepreneurs dominate. And then all of that was, the financing activities was supported with a significant non-financial services to the women-led SMEs that was provided both through the participating banks, but also directly by the EBRD's SME group for finance and advice, or ASB. So as a result of that, about 2,500 women benefited from what we call business lens seminars in the group format, and another 800 women entrepreneurs benefited from the mentoring and capacity building and a tailor-made assistance. So what's next? In 2018, we have approved a second phase of the Women in Business program that was double the size, and that was also combined with the, or coincided, was facilitated with the MOU signed with the Credit Guarantee Fund in Turkey. So the main augmenting feature of the program was that instead of relying and embedding the first loss risk cushion of the funded by the donors, we have leveraged the existing Credit Guarantee Fund's facility for providing the first loss to the banks and work within the protocols of the banks, the Turkish banks signed with the KGF. And therefore, we have reduced the coverage from 10% initially to 7% in line with the protocols that the banks have signed. We have also opened up the financial intermediaries to other non-bank FIs, and it looks like it resonated with what Etkin has presented as one of the ways to increase the outreach of the financing to women entrepreneurs. And we continue to expand the program into the regions and also into the first-time borrowers who haven't had the business facilities from the banks. So it's interesting that the digitalization I haven't put it here because it's one of the cross-cutting areas for us, but obviously we are very keen to leverage on the existing technology to reach out to women, whether it's by the way of creating alternative credit history for women, or partnering with the institutions that have this sort of spending pattern, the payments of the women that can be used as a credit history. This is how the guarantee works with the KGF. This is how it's basically the copy of the previous, the initial Women in Business program in Turkey, except that now the first loss risk cushion, instead of being embedded in the financing agreement between the EBRD PFI, is currently being provided on a standalone basis by the KGF. We hope to launch the program later this year. You would have noticed a long lead time since the signing and approval of the program in 2018. That has obviously coincided with quite a tumultuous period in Turkey and then been amplified by the COVID-19. So maybe I'll just a few words, because I know that we're running out of time, to say how would we want to build back better, and what we would like to concentrate and focus on in our future engagement in Turkey. And I'd like to say that we would like to create a systemic impact by building back better and leverage on the EBRD's policy engagement, its engagement in the sort of to create a holistic and integrated ecosystem for the women. And that's what we would like to work with all of the IFIs. It's lovely that the previous speakers have picked up on a lot of those topics to create an inclusive financial system for women entrepreneurs in Turkey. So maybe a few highlights here. The impact that we'd like to achieve is, first of all, in introducing a unified definition, national definition of women-led SMEs that can then be supported by the sex disaggregated data. As some of this once was quoted to me that in God I trust, everything else show me the data. So I think for women entrepreneurship, that's not an exception. I think we all will benefit from a unified database of the SMEs on a sex disaggregated basis. I think the discussion with the regulator would like to focus on the introduction of the gender KPIs and the regular mandatory disclosure of those KPIs by the whole banking sector. This can then be topped up by the great gender sensitive ecosystem. Again, Edkin mentioned the Great Guarantee Fund. I think the SME agency has a role in registering the SMEs and sex disaggregating them at the start. The collateral registry, note that the issues that women entrepreneurs face with the lack of collateral, Great Information Bureau, and I think the list goes on. And finally, at the P5 level, we're already working very actively, but I think what we would like to see is more of an emphasis on building the inclusive financial institutions by promoting women within the management and the board and increase the diversity. So I think I will stop here and we'll be happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Oksana. I particularly like the Build Back Better slogan. I think it's a great motto towards building inclusiveness.
Unfortunately, yeah.
It is.
Unfortunately, I didn't come up with this as the EBRD's new logo.
Yeah, I understand. We now arrive to our last panelist. We are still missing one last panelist, Güven Sak. He is an economist and scholar in capital markets and financial topics. He's also the Area Studies Program Director for the Economic Policy Research Foundation of Turkey. Mr. Sak, I'll give you the floor now.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Federico. First, I have to thank for all the great presentations. It was, I have learned a lot about the programs of the international financial institutions. Learned once more, let me say. I just would like to underline a few issues. One is, the changing meaning of women entrepreneurship or gender disparity issue that we are now facing with, because there is this global mega trend that's affecting all of us, Turkey also too at the same time. Turkey also has an aging population, and I think we are going to see the impact starting from 2040. So, and that's a result of the fact that, the life expectancy is increasing in Turkey, and at the same time, women fertility rate is declining. So it's kind of women fertility rate in Turkey is converging to the European values. It's 1.8 nowadays per child per woman, and it is declining continually. That makes, I think, that puts women entrepreneurship and female labor force participation issues, this gender equality issue in totality, into a different perspective. It's becoming a much more important issue now in Turkey for us in terms of the growth dynamics. So I think this is one new thing that we need to take into account when discussing programs when talking about domestic programs regarding the issue too from now on. And secondly, I think COVID-19 has also changed one other thing, is digitalization. It has got into our lives now, and electronic trading systems are becoming more and more important. I have heard 10% as the share of women business owners among the total business owners in Turkey. My notes were saying that, I think this is MasterCard values, it says for Turkey 7.7%. ILO says it was around 9%, but it is low when compared to the European countries. Although the women fertility rate is converging, this thing is not yet converging to the European values. But when you look at, for example, Turkish electronic trading systems, electronic trade systems, 25% of the companies that are selling their goods in these mechanisms, in the domestic e-trade systems, are female-owned, are women-owned. As far as I have learned, I collected data from the vendors themselves. So it looks highly likely that digitalization is also opening a way for female-owned businesses to gain new ground in the country. And if you look at, for example, the domestic payment system, I remember a study on EasyCo, for example, in Turkey. Again, the share of female-owned businesses using those more secure payment mechanisms is significantly higher than the share of female-owned enterprises in Turkey in total. So I think this shows that it might be interesting. I mean, as far as I follow all the discussions, there is this investing directly in women mechanisms are very much used by the IFIs in Turkey. It might be interesting maybe to focus on some interfaces. These digital trading systems, these digital payment systems, some fintech solutions. So in order to empower women, then it might be interesting. It might be cultural too, I don't know. It might be interesting to focus a little bit more on using and supporting these interfaces. It's kind of, you know, package of services. It's like the Chinese trade facilitation center like mechanisms, you know. It can easily turn into something like that. Alibaba did those things for SMEs in general, not only in China, but also in India. So it might be interesting to support maybe these interfaces when they do support female-owned businesses. So I think in this new environment, in this new age, we may look for some solutions also by looking at the developments on the ground, by looking at these new trends. Because when I look at the trends, it gives at least the first impression that these mechanisms are increasing market access, are providing some kind of a market access capability for female-owned businesses. And there were some examples regarding that, let's say, from Japan, and also in terms of the agriculture in Korea too. So it might be interesting to have a look at, for the IFIs too, how to support these interfaces to empower women in business activity in Turkey. So I'll be brief, Federico. Let me stop here.
Thank you very much. I mean, very insightful words. We have some questions from the floor, but I need to organize them a little bit and to read them. In the meantime, I'm gonna launch a question to the speakers, and don't hesitate just to enter the conversation. We spoke lengthily about your organization's support to women entrepreneurship, and we are talking here about so many projects being financed through international financial institutions and multilateral development banks. Do you think that the current pandemic, could it be considered as a turning point for transforming a society and perhaps accelerating economic and social reforms affecting women in Turkey? And I was wondering if Turkey could eventually, if it isn't already, could it be seen as a benchmark for countries in the region? So don't hesitate to jump on. I'm not going to choose any speaker. I mean, we are running out of time, so just enter the conversation.
There is no one I can start saying a few words on that. I think, yes, I mean, if you look at female-owned businesses in total in different countries, you know, if you come up from the list, let's say, with the countries with the highest share, highest percentage, around Turkey and after Turkey, some Muslim majority countries are starting. So it might be interesting to focus on this new, let me say, I can't say a trend now. It's not a trend, but it looks highly likely that the digitalization is helping women to increase their access to the market in the case of Turkey. So it might work in other countries in our region too, if you ask me. You can call that a cultural thing, because it is then easier with these digital tools for women to go out and look for customers without directly in contact with them, which might be culturally more easier to do, especially in agricultural areas. So this is a good topic to focus on. But I think it is not only for the IFIs to consider their policies. How the regulators are going to react are also important here in terms of, you know, because these then digital payment system need to be within the domestic regulatory framework. You know, the labor market regulations are also has to be adapted to the gig economy in one way or another. So it is not only what the IFIs in terms of their funding. I mean, I can only have in my mind of focusing more on these, supporting more these interfaces in terms of the IFIs. But I think the domestic regulatory authorities also, they have to react very quickly to understand the meaning of this trend and change the regulations accordingly, I think.
Anyone else wants to chip in?
Maybe I'll very quickly add, I agree with Güven Bey on the possibilities and the opportunities that the digitalization and the technologies are offering to female participation in the economy, to the e-commerce, to entrepreneurship, and I also chime in with the regulator and the work that needs to be done in regards to the e-signature, regulation of the e-payments, know your customer, and we have recently done big work with the e-identity for the Syrian, a large population of the Syrian refugees in Turkey that still continue to be a challenge. And I think most of those people are still excluded from the financial system. And finally, there was recently a World Bank blog that has talked about the benefits of non-cash payment of the business loans to women entrepreneurs, and the positive link to the economic growth of the women SME if the payment of the loan is done directly to the account or the mobile platform, because then women entrepreneur is less pressured by family to share the proceeds of the loan or to spend it on the non-business purposes. So yeah.
Can I add just one more point? Actually, usually Güven Hocam is right always, but in this case, if you look at the situation right now, most of the women entrepreneurs in Turkey are the first-time users. So I totally agree. The international, I mean, the fintech platform, digital solutions will work well, but for the first-time solutions, for first-time users, actually financial literacy could be a solution. So in this environment, in this COVID environment, I suggest the regulators like the central bank and capital market boards, actually they've been very active in this area. They could just reignite their efforts to increase the financial literacy of the households, especially the women. It will be a good opportunity for them.
Thank you very much. It's true that financial literacy, it's it's a generational problem. I mean, it would take generations, at least in Europe, to make people become investors, small investors. I mean, it's a tricky discussion, but very interesting. We have a question here from why we keep talking about SMEs when we will come to how to reach big capital and create bigger businesses. I mean, the size of SMEs changes quite dramatically across Europe and in Turkey as well. I mean, yeah, it depends. I mean, we have a definition of SME at the European level, but it's not harmonized, let's say, at the national level. It differs quite substantially. Maybe any of the panelists would like to chip in terms of how to make these, how to scale up these businesses. How can women profit from scaling up these businesses and creating bigger businesses, if possible?
Sure, I can talk about AFC's perspective. So when we look at how AFC is organized, the real sector companies that are outside of SMEs are covered by two different sectors, manufacturing, agriculture, services, or infrastructure companies. So both of these industries have a focus on women-owned businesses, apparently, and we do approach them differently. But when you look at financial institutions, our major goal is job creation. And we see that most of job creation in Turkey is coming from the small and medium businesses. That's why IFC is working with financial institutions so that they can channel the funds to SMEs and women-owned SMEs. So this is the perspective of financial institutions, but we're also supporting mid-cap or larger corporates through our real sector businesses.
And maybe I can quickly add to what Yosham is saying. That we're talking primarily about the SMEs because we think as the enterprise get bigger, the access to finance issue become less acute because the business have more of the cash generation, more of the cash reserves, the more assets to collateralize. So, so all of those sort of externalities unfavorable to women entrepreneurs become less prominent as the size of the enterprise progresses.
Thank you very much. I don't see any other question, and I think we are getting towards the end. Let me just see if I see any other question. I don't actually. So I think we can head towards the end. I just wanted to give a short wrap up speech, and indeed the time flew by. I think we need to conclude. I would like to thank all of the speakers for your excellent contributions and all the participants for attending the session and asking questions and engaging in discussions. I know that some questions were answered in Turkish, I noticed. I think all in all, we have a very comprehensive picture of the challenges women entrepreneurs are facing and also the possible financing solutions that could respond to them. One of the questions that one of the participants asked is whether how can we achieve or how can we reach these funding sources. I think that you need to let's say liaise with the departments that are located in Turkey, with the financial intermediaries. Usually I guess they launch call for proposals, I guess, depending on the project. I mean, but women have come a long way. Women entrepreneurs have come a long way, but a lot of work still needs to be done to achieve equal opportunities for women and to enhance their economic position and leadership. And therefore, in the current situation, we have a lot of short-term measures being deployed all over Europe, and I think in Turkey as well. And I think policymakers need to make sure that they address all the challenges that the panelists touched upon. And these challenges require continuous awareness raising, financial literacy, and they need to be addressed collectively by governments, by financial and non-financial institutions, by the private sector, including the small business community and the large business community, by all of us, I think. Thank you again for your participation. Have a great afternoon and stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.